It's such an honor and a privilege to say welcome, Mr. Nico Kleynhans.
Welcome, thank you, and also to the listeners. I am just over 27,500 days old.
27,500
Days
Wow.
And my
old.
brain just
Okay.
had a little bit of a walk.
And I've had a lot of time to reflect and make mistakes. And one of the things that I'm often confronted with is people tell me they know God has called them to do something, but what is it they're going to do if they make a mistake? And I thought, after hearing that again a couple of days ago, I should retell that particular story of my life.
Brilliant.
You see, if God's standard is perfection, he would not have called the disciples, and then he wouldn't call any of us anyway, because there are going to be times when we are going to make mistakes. Now, my story happened when I was invited to address a congregation. And it was a congregation that I had never addressed before. So it was a big deal for the congregation. They advertised it. This preacher was coming up from the Western Cape, and they did all kinds of fancy things.
Yeah, and it was a more traditional church, eh?
It was a
very serious occasion.
It was a formal occasion. And I duly arrived, and at the last minute, I got a phone call from the pastor. And he said, I know you're supposed to be preaching tonight. I'm not feeling well. I need you to preach this morning. And now that already threw me, because now I've got to really hurry. I've got to get to the church, and I need to be doing it properly. So I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And he said, and then you're going to have to preach in the evening as well.
Okay.
And you're going to need to just plan something else.
Yeah, for the evening.
For the evening service. So I said, okay, fine. I got to the church, parked, went in, and there the leader of the congregation met me. And he said, okay, we weren't expecting you now, but let's get you ready. And he introduced me to the person at the soundbox. And the soundbox person said, my job is to record everything you say. And then we're going to put that on cassettes so that the people who are at home and are not feeling well can hear your message and benefit from it. And then the guy said, okay, now we need to get you dressed up. And they got this robe, they put it on, and I was already feeling uncomfortable. I'm not very comfortable looking like a Christmas tree. And some of these robes make you look like that. Yeah. And then he added a lapel mic, and he said, everything you say is going to be recorded.
Yeah.
And he took me to the front of the church, put me down in the pew to wait for my turn to get into the pulpit. And as I looked at the pulpit, it was one of these chariot-shaped affairs.
Yes, yeah.
1 meter above the ground, and it was clearly built to put you above contradiction, so that when you were speaking, nobody's going to dare challenge anything you say.
Yeah.
Well, the service went as normal, and at the appropriate time, I was escorted and went to the back of the pulpit, and now I had to climb up. And then I realized we had a problem, because the preacher who normally spoke in that service was somewhat shorter than I was.
Okay.
So when he got into the pulpit, the congregation couldn't always see what they were paying for. And churches like to do things on the cheap.
Yeah, because
why waste money on things like safety and security?
Exactly. Why?
And so their solution was to take Pepsi-Cola boxes. Now, if Pepsi-Cola those days made plastic crates, it would have been a safe thing to do. But if you're using wooden crates, with age, wooden crates shrink and change and wobble. And so they raised the level of the pulpit by using Pepsi-Cola crates. And because I was the unexpected speaker, they had forgotten to remove the Pepsi-Cola crates from the back of the pulpit. Well, there was not much I could do. I climbed and appeared, and already the congregation realized what had happened, because they were seeing way too much of me. And I was going to speak on the theme of God's surprises.
Okay.
It was a very dramatic sermon. Now, those who have seen me speak, I don't stand still
He really doesn't.
when I speak. I move around. And it was a dramatic sermon talking about in the desert, and there were serpents, and there was Moses, and all kinds of things were happening. And at the moment that I was making my point, I leant forward, and my stomach, which was a lot bigger than it is today, touched the reading light.
Now, those reading lights back in the day were not LEDs. They were hot
They were hot,
tubes that would melt your skin.
and they were hotter than I had realized. So there he was making his point. There was a loud shout, and suddenly there was a crash as the preacher disappeared from the pulpit and landed on the ground.
Ouch.
Now, there's good news and bad news. The good news is I didn't kill myself.
True story.
Yes.
The bad
True
news
story.
is I landed in my behind. And I was feeling frustrated, and I forgot the lapel mic was still broadcasting everything I was about to say.
And it was being recorded.
And it was being recorded for the poor dears at home. And I commented on this inability of Christians to take the safety of their pastors and preachers into account when they try and find cheap solutions.
Yeah.
That was what I said. I fortunately used words that were acceptable from a pulpit. I didn't use words that were never heard in a church before.
Yeah.
But by then, the elders had come around and had picked me up. I had to get back into the pulpit. So they first removed the Pepsi cases. And as I reappeared, I had the full attention of that congregation. I have
Everybody
never
was
had that
wide
much
awake.
wide awake, listening, smiling, greeting, some even
How was
applauded.
that for a surprise?
But I had their attention.
Sure.
I finished the sermon as best I could. And at the end, I went back to the pastor and said, I have really embarrassed you. I've embarrassed myself. I've embarrassed your congregation. I don't think I should be speaking tonight. And he laughed and said, you need to speak. Of course, I've heard what happened. You need to go back. I know my congregation. And I spent the day thinking, God, I've let you down.
Sure.
And you've trusted me, and look at what I've done.
Yeah.
Well, the evening came. I parked outside, and I was feeling really uneasy. The first thing I noticed, there was no parking in the street. It was absolutely crowded with people. And then I noticed that there were a lot more people in church than there were in the morning. And the guy at the back on the sound booth was really harassed. He told me he had never had so many orders for a sermon before. And he was not going to have enough empty cassettes to record for everything.
Yeah. Duplicate.
But I dressed up as normal, and I was taken to the front row to wait my turn. And then I realized that there were a clergy from other congregations who had now decided to visit. And they introduced themselves as members of the Ministers Fraternal. And they had decided the time had come for them to work together. Because of what had happened the morning, they faced similar problems, but they thought it was a good time to start working together as clergy. Well, as I got into the pulpit, I noticed they'd been kind enough to remove the Pepsi. And the guy had, as he introduced me, reminded the congregation that Pepsi was not always good for your health. And I finished what I had to say. But that day I learned that if God wanted perfection, he would not have chosen me in the beginning. My job is to be obedient to the calling. And those of us who claim to be believers, our job is not to worry that God might have made a mistake.
Yeah.
We were chosen because we have a job to do. And our job is to be obedient to that. So it doesn't matter if you mess up. As long as you're obedient, you're a part of God's plan. You're an ambassador of God. And that's what God expects of us. So it's not a matter of being perfect. It's a matter of being obedient.
Come on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. Thank you. And let's always remember that it's about obedience. So hear God's voice and obey. Nico Kleynhans, thank you so much, sir.